On today's episode,
Agency is we look to tell stories through all of the work we do. For every piece of content, we look for the story. People just love seeing the human side of anything, a way to contribute to storytelling through the work that they do. After the story went in the paper, we just got thousands and thousands of emails, letters from people, a lot of men, a lot of young men, to get people talking more about mental health, to encourage people not to feel stigmatized, particularly men, that you're never going to get going until you get going.
Nick, welcome to the Chester Centurion Podcast.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get started today, Nick, I'd love to know more about the business. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
So I run Magnify PR. We're really a traditional PR agency, I would say. We've been going now for around 2 and a bit years. So the reason I called the business Magnify, we do exactly what we say on the tin, really. Job, what we specialise in is really magnifying the expertise and the skills and the experiences and the successes of the clients we work with, which is why I obviously came up with the name of the agency that I did. We do that through lots of different ways, but ultimately the principle which is kind of at the heart of the business and the agency is we look to tell stories through all of the work we do. For every piece of content, we look for the story. And that really goes back to my background as a journalist. I worked for around 20 years on Fleet Street. So my training and my background is all in journalism and breaking stories, telling stories. And then I'd look to transfer that into the PR setting.
What kind of clients do you work with, Nick?
Well, today, so I know I look a bit like I'm in a kind of Blockbusters style studio here, but
I love it.
this is a podcast studio at GB News. So today I'm with GB News, who are one of my biggest clients. So we've been looking after them now for around 4 years. So I know I said the agency's only been going 2.5 years, but we'll probably come on to that because there's a reason why I launched this business 2.5 years ago. I have clients from before that. The GB News is one of our biggest clients. And so I sit here today. I'm here normally 2 days a month in London working for them. In the office. Today and yesterday have been incredible days to be in this office, seeing the Prime Minister kind of desperately trying to cling on to his job, and being involved in that with GB News is a huge privilege. My job for GB News, going back to what I just said there before, is to magnify all of the great content that they're producing every day. So the brilliant stories that they're breaking, the fantastic that they have on and on radio and on TV, trying to get that into as many other newspapers and outlets as we can. That help to project GB News and tell the story of the growth that they're on. So that's one of our biggest clients. We also look after businesses in all kinds of different areas. So we specialise in looking after companies within the legal setting. We look after companies in property, in tech. We look after individuals as well, some from a broadcast background, others from business and from the entrepreneurial space. And we also look after charities as well. We've got about 3 or 4 charities we look after. But again, going back to my original point, kind of everyone we look after and we work with has got an amazing story to tell. They've got a way to contribute to storytelling through the work that they do. And that's why we work with them.
So why should we take PR seriously? What are the advantages to a business for employing a PR agency?
Well, I think a good example, I mean, going back to Keir Starmer yesterday, so if I had it in front of you, I'd show you the front of the Daily Telegraph this morning, which the headline was something along the lines of, it beggars belief what I'm saying, I think was the quote. And so yesterday in Parliament, when he was trying to save his job, he said to everyone in Parliament, I know what I'm saying beggars belief. And everybody in the Parliament just laughed. And I, as a PR person, immediately thought, who on earth has advised him to say that? Because he's immediately made life even more difficult for himself. And I think that really addresses your point. PR isn't easy. It's never straightforward, but ultimately the key and the red line that I have with any client is you try and advise them on how to do things that are going to benefit them. And often through their communications, a misstep, a misplaced word, more than ever now, a misplaced tweet can destroy a business or a reputation overnight. So having somebody there to advise you, And that, by the way, isn't to tell you not to do things. It's to give you advice. And again, you might come onto this. I always advise my clients what I think they should do. If they choose to ignore that advice, then I'll always respect them and I'll die in a ditch to try and repair any damage that might be done. But generally, you use your experience to try and advise them. And I think that's one of the values of PR. There are many others. I mean, one of the most obvious ones is good PR, good content can really grow your brand online, through SEO. And there's a lot going on at the moment in terms of Google, in terms of AI, where positive PR on websites with a high domain authority that rank well can transform your business. And that's not just me talking in PR speak, that is the reality. And that's why PR, I think, has a real benefit at the moment.
Are you seeing a shift towards personal brand?
I think personal brand is really important. I think, for instance, going back to the GB News scenario, you've got the channel, but then you've also got the presenters. So we're coming off the back a week ago of a really sad story here about Eamon Holmes suffering a stroke, which was on the front page of, pretty much every national newspaper last week. So we were dealing with that. So there's a crossover. And I always encourage my clients to see the benefits of personal PR and branding. I think there's particular benefits in LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn now as a platform is proven to be a great way to grow your business, to generate leads. And as a result of that, generally, I find that people want to invest in other people. They want to see the figurehead behind the brand. So I think owners and CEOs have to be willing to put a little bit more of themselves out there. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to put all of your life on social media. But I think if you want to cut through as an owner, you need to have a clear, defined brand, and people need to know what you stand for and what your values are. And that can really help you.
Be relatable, right?
I think so, yeah. I mean, look, reality is if you're a CEO and you put a picture of your dog in the office one day, you'll get 5 gazillion likes. If you put a picture of yourself in a board meeting, you'll probably get a handful. People just love seeing the human side of anything. It goes back to my point about storytelling, I think. And I don't think business owners and those looking to grow their PR should shy away from that. They should embrace it if they can, but obviously you have to do it in a controlled way that doesn't, step into your private life too much.
Get it. So you've been going 2 and a bit years?
Yeah.
What motivated you to start your own business in the first place? What was the driving force behind that decision to take on this entrepreneurial role?
Was a number of factors. So going way back, I went to university, I studied journalism. All I ever wanted to do was to be a journalist. I was a bit of a weird kid, growing up dreaming of being an astronaut or a footballer or whatever. I wanted to be a newspaper journalist, just from a very young age. So I set my heart on that. So I had a very clear idea. I went to university, I studied journalism, did 3 years at Preston, University of Central Lancashire. It's not a million miles away from Chester. And I stayed and did another year as postgraduate in a postgraduate diploma to get my law, to get my shorthand. And then last 3 months, I worked for the local newspaper in Preston for free, much to the annoyance of my lecturers who said I should be being paid. But my idea was if I did well enough, I'd have a job waiting for me at the end of it. That worked for me. And I left university with a job on a local newspaper, which was brilliant. It was, for me, the highlight of my journalistic career. 2 years working on a local paper. It was just so much fun. I got to work on some amazing stories. In the morning, I'd be covering a WI meeting. In the afternoon, I'd be in court covering a murder sentence. In the evening, I'd be in the city centre covering a murder. It was just non-stop, and I loved it. And then the natural progression for me was then to go on and work on national newspapers, which I did. Worked on Fleet Street, at the Mirror, and again starting at reporting level but working all my way up to editor level, so fulfilled my ambition of editing. But then I sort of lost my job in 2019, and I had a period where obviously I had a decision to make of whether I would continue working in newspapers or make a pivot into something else. And what I did, I guess I kind of then made a bit of a business decision, I guess, which was the first time I'd done that in my life. I knew newspapers weren't an industry that were kind of thriving, if you know what I mean. Less people are buying newspapers. I still adore newspapers. I've got them everywhere in my house every day. I buy 3 or 4 every day still, but they're not selling. So I needed something that I could do for 20, 25, 30 years, really, because at that point I was in my sort of early 30s. And I had good contacts working as I did in newspapers. And I was kind of a bit fed up of always working for the same newspaper. So I decided to launch my first business in 2019, which was a business that allowed members of the public to sell stories to the media. So that was the first business I set up in 2019, a company called WTS Media. Launched it in Chester because I have family ties there. It's where my wife's from. She was forever. I mean, she wanted to move back to Chester all the time we were living in London. So it was a good opportunity.
It is a beautiful city though, Nick.
Beautiful city. But everyone always asked me, how did someone with an Essex accent end up back in Chester? So there's the answer. But it is a beautiful city, and I've come to call it my home, and I'm very proud to do that, and hope we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. And that business was going well. It was fantastic, and I was helping people break stories and getting them in all different kinds of newspapers. And then, unfortunately, for me and for everybody else, obviously, in the world, COVID happened in 2020. And I've listened to some of the episodes on here, and I've heard people's own experiences of coming through the pandemic. Mine was quite unique in that I was operating in a space where my whole business operated on newspapers buying stories from me. And for about 1.5 years, they were just picking up the phone to me saying, Nick, we're not buying stories now. We don't need to. We've page 1 to 25 of our paper is COVID. And all those great stories I was selling, they just either didn't want to buy, or if they did, the value for them just went through the floor. Mm-hmm. So we did obviously what a lot of people did during COVID. We kind of diversified, and I specialised at that point in PR, offered more of a PR service, working remotely for some clients. When we came out of the pandemic, the first lockdown, we'd built up some good clients. And I realised that for the first time, there were a lot of transferable skills I had to work in PR. But I had a business that was set up and marketed and had a website to sell stories, which also did PR. Going back to the GB News point, one of those clients was GB News that we picked up. And so I decided 2.5 years ago to relaunch as Magnify. WTS Media still exists. We still offer that facility to sell stories, but Magnify is really where I spend 95% of my time as a business owner.
Really cool. And you've been involved in a few books as well. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, so I'm glad to see you've got one on show there, Alan. I'll put the check in the post. Yeah. So Frank Bruno is a big part of my career and my life now, actually. He's an incredible man, a friend of mine. Yeah, I first met Frank in 2012, so going right back to when I was on the Mirror. Frank had come out of hospital. It's the second time in his life that he'd been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. First time was obviously incredibly high profile, way back in 2003, when he was subject to what is now a very infamous front page headline where he was called Bonkers Bruno on the front of the Sun. Everyone remembers for all the wrong reasons. Frank had fallen ill again and decided that he wanted to talk publicly about that. It was an incredibly brave thing for him to do. He was incredibly wary of doing it, very nervous. And I was sent to interview him for the Mirror. It was a big story. He invested heavily in a TV advertising campaign. And it was the first time we'd met. And he was incredibly honest that day, as Frank is. Spoke about, what happened, the relapse, and we told the story over 2 days in the Sunday Mirror and the Daily Mirror, but we were absolutely overwhelmed with messages at the end of it. After the story went in the paper, we just got thousands and thousands of emails, letters from people, a lot of young men, all saying to us, we're really, really grateful for Frank sharing his story. Frank and I realised at that point that this was going to be more than just a one-off story, that there was an opportunity here to do something more longer term. In fact, we had to. So about 2 or 3 weeks after that, we sat down again and we set out a strategy to launch a big campaign back in, I think it was around 2013, just to get people talking more about mental health, to encourage people not to feel stigmatized, particularly men. And our campaign was an immediate success. I mean, we had thousands of people sign petitions. We had involvement from the government straight away. Frank was called into a meeting at Westminster, and he became an ambassador for the government. Pretty soon after, it spun off to he launched his own foundation, and then he went on a nationwide tour to talk about his campaign. And that then developed about 2 or 3 years after our first interview into the first book that we wrote, which was a book on Frank's illness called Let Me Be Frank, because in a newspaper interview, you can only say so much, and there was so much that was still needed to be said. So we sat down together and we published that book. That was a real success, really well received. And we sold out on that book after a couple of years. And then when Frank turned 60, which I think was around 5 years ago now, we decided to write a second book, which is behind you there, 60 Years a Fighter. And that book is less about Frank's illness, although there's still some stuff in there about his ongoing battle with bipolar, which is, what it is. It's a lifelong condition. He'll always have it. He's never shied away from that. But what that book is and why I actually prefer that book, I'll say it, and the publishers won't thank me for it, is that Frank, as well as having obviously very high profile illness, has had just the most brilliant, hilarious, colourful life. So many stories, and not just in the ring, outside the ring. And that book really goes into that in great detail. Yeah, he's still one of the only person I've ever been with in terms of, so I've been in and around some quite high profile people over the years. He's the only person I've been with who stops traffic.
Well, if you look up legend in the dictionary, there just needs to be a picture of Frank there, right?
Yeah, you walk down the street now with him in London and it literally does. And he's still got that kind of X factor in terms of his personality. And so working with him on that has been a real privilege. And hot off the press, I can give you a little exclusive for the Centurions Podcast.
Yes.
We're working on a new book.
Oh, wow.
Which is going to be out in time for Christmas. The publishers will thank me for saying that. But that book there was meant to be the last book that we wrote.
Mm-hmm. But
all I'll say is that sometimes things change in life, and Frank's story isn't over yet. And we're going to be telling a story about a really, really interesting 18 months in Frank's life, which I think everybody's going to enjoy reading, and it's going to be really good.
Well, he spoke via live stream at Chester Town Hall, and I think we had about 120 people in the room that day. And this is a signed book, and it's one of my treasured possessions. So thank you so much, Nick.
That's right.
I love the guy to bits. I think he's a genuine legend. And I was in the room with 1,500 business owners when he walked on stage as a surprise guest, and everybody stood up and just started shouting Bruno, Bruno, Bruno. So you're absolutely right. That gentleman will be able to stop traffic anywhere in the UK and probably beyond as well.
Well, we had him, Alan, actually just a couple of weeks ago. We had him in Chester as well at the Crown Plaza.
Okay.
So it was an evening with, and it was completely sold out, and it was fantastic. I don't organise these events, but I was there as a guest, and I spoke to Frank on stage. And you have a scenario where if you want to meet Frank, get a signed photo, you can arrive a little bit earlier. And when I arrived, there must have been about 100, 150 people all queuing up for the picture. It was great. And then he came on stage and talked about his life for an hour. And I'm always struck, actually, because I've been in and around Frank a lot at events he's done in the Northwest. I know he's a Londoner, and he's born and raised in, Wandsworth, doesn't live in London, he lives outside of London, but it's hugely popular in the north of England.
I think it's hugely popular anywhere.
No, I know.
It's just omnipresent.
He loves it as well. I keep telling him he needs to come and he needs to get himself a Cheshire pad.
Oh, without a doubt. He's welcome anytime.
Whether he'll do it or not, I don't know.
Listen, we need to get back to business. I'm so sorry. We could talk about that all day, but what are some of the common misconceptions you find about running a business? How would you go about describing them?
Wow, I mean, that is a good question. I think misconceptions are, first of all, that you can control everything, and I've grappled with that. I feel that one of the things I'm still learning as a new business owner is to delegate. And I feel that a lot of business owners feel they can do too much. So that's something I'm still wrestling with. I think sometimes people have a misconception as well that working for yourself is great because you haven't got anyone to answer to. I had this discussion with someone today who bizarrely said, "Oh, I don't like my boss. I can't be standing, blah, 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 blah." Not at GB News, by the way. So before you get
That's good.
And then we got chatting about my situation. I said, well, when you're your own boss, that you end up becoming your own biggest critic, really, and your own the hardest judge. So I think that's a misconception as well, that working for yourself is always easy. It's not. I think as well, another misconception about business is that there isn't people out there who want to help you, and I think that's one of the things that surprised me most. And going back to Chester, when I set up my first business, I thought, right, it's going to be really hard, and it was, and there won't be any support out there. But actually, I found that, when I joined the Chester Business Club, for instance, which I'm now on the exec council of, and what I found there was a lot of really great like-minded people, all in their own businesses, some working for themselves, and people were always really happy to just offer advice. So I think there's this it's a big club, don't get me wrong, but there is this great club when you work for yourself. And it might be that it's in a formal setting, like at the business club when you're at an event. It might be if you're just on a train sometimes. If I'm on a train from London to Chester on 2 hours, I'll be sitting opposite someone who works for themselves, and you just talk about how it works and what you do, and you get great advice that way. And that, for me, was the biggest learning, that there was loads of people out there who, a lot of them have been on this podcast, who are really happy to help out. You just got to ask.
Isn't that interesting? I think that's a massive takeaway for me, that we don't ask for help enough.
Yeah.
I remember at a barbecue talking to one of my colleagues who'd written a business book, and they had a foreword by the great Marshall Goldsmith, and I think it was Alan Sugar.
Yeah.
And I said to them, I says, I don't understand. How did you get them to write a foreword for your book? And she said to me, she says, I'm going to let you into a secret, Alan, but you're not allowed to tell anyone else. And I leant in to hear this incredible secret. And she went, I asked them.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. You've just got to ask. And I think that goes back to obviously another thing that I try and encourage, everybody who works for me and obviously I work with is just to try and don't overthink things, to go for stuff. I think particularly in PR, that's a problem. We can spend ages putting strategies in place and trying stuff and doing this. You've just got to go for things. Ask for help if you go wrong. Not be afraid to, pivot. There's some of the fundamentals about launching a business. Obviously, we've all been in the same boat. Like, how do you register your business? How do you get an accountant? What about if you need to switch accountant? All of these things that seem very scary are the kind of things that a lot of business owners have been through, and they've never got a problem with offering their view and their advice on it, and often referring someone that's helped them along the way. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception I had.
Some incredible networks locally,
yeah,
including the one that you're involved in, Nick, that's full of people that are happy to help.
Yeah, and I mean, the great thing about the Chester Business Club as well is, we try and have events that bring people, in from outside of the club as well, so you don't have to be in it. Obviously, we want as many members as possible. For anyone listening to this who is in Chester, for instance, we have a brilliant event, 5/7 on the last Thursday of every month.
Yeah,
which is it's normally at Artisan, which most people in Chester will know. That's a great place. You just pop in and you'll find normally 60, 70 people. I'm sometimes there, sometimes I'm not. And it's just a great reset night. You can just talk about, your month, what's gone right, what's gone wrong, some of the challenges you've had, things that are happening and I've come away from those nights 4 or 5 times with a name or a number who has then transformed my following month.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you haven't been along to that event, you've got to. It's incredible. And Artisan's not too bad either, right?
No, I know the owner.
Very nice.
He won't. Yeah, there are other restaurants in Chester.
There are other restaurants in Chester, but the Artisan is a particularly nice one as well. So how do you maintain a work-life balance? This is always a great question.
Yeah,
and that's the face that most people make. By the way.
I mean, if my wife was on the call, she'd probably say I don't have one.
Yeah.
I think, look, I've worked as a journalist, and I spent 20 years with a bag in my boot, packed, knowing that I could be called at any moment to go anywhere in the world to cover a story. That's what it's like on a national newspaper, and that's a hell of an investment in your life. You know, you have to be prepared to drop everything and go. So I've probably entered business with a slightly different mentality in that I've come from that background. So I'd like to think I'm not afraid of working hard, but I don't think working hard necessarily means working a lot long hours. It's about working smart. And I think for me, what I've learned about running my own business is that I probably work every day, which for some people sounds mad. They're, like, working every day might mean some days I'll only do 2 or 3 hours, whereas the other day it will be a lot more full on. So I try and structure my day in that way. I obviously try and make time as much as I can, obviously, to do other stuff. I try and go for a run in the morning. I try and make time at weekends for the odd round of golf. But equally, at the moment, with the stage I'm at in developing the business, I would argue that, you know, work is 90% of my life in terms of what I have to do. But what it also means, and I've made this point in, you know, talks I've done recently, is that I am very lucky in that I can then decide my own diary. If I want to, like on Thursday, I'm parents' evening, I'm there at 3:00. I haven't got to ask anyone, so I can do that. So I prioritise all of that. I definitely make time, obviously, to ensure that I've got 2 young children. As a family, we spend a lot of time together. But unfortunately, they've come to learn that when we go on holiday, even for a week, the laptop has to come, and it's just kind of the way it is because of the nature of the work I'm in. And I've learned as well that I don't work well by switching off for like 2 weeks. And I think there might be a lot of business owners who wouldn't admit that, but that's just how I am, I'm afraid.
There's a lot of truth in it.
There's more stress. There's more stress sometimes, bizarrely, in switching off for 2 weeks, then coming back to a load of unanswered emails and work that you've got to deal with. So, you know, I've with a work-life balance, for instance, if I've got a week off, I'll set myself maybe an hour in the evening late just to check back in, make sure nothing's gone wrong, going back to delegation, having good people there to cover me while I'm not there. But then just so I can keep an eye on things, just so I know when I come back, everything is going to be all right.
So you're in this period of growth for Magnify PR. What's next?
We've entered a key period where we've hired now. So we've headcount there's myself and 4 others within the business. So that's a good number, and it enables us to manage the accounts that we've got. But for us, the next step is to continue to grow by bringing more people in and then having more accounts. So, you know, the way we're structured is pretty straightforward. At the moment, I would say that we've got about 30 clients, 30, that we work with. So I'd like to take that off to the next level, maybe looking to grow that to 40, 50 within the next 2 to 3 years. But as people know in this particular sector, you might end up working with one client who ends up being worth 5 or 6 in terms of retainer value or whatever. So that it's a difficult one to say, but ultimately our aim is to continue to grow, attract more clients. I want to bring in more staff to manage those accounts. We were very privileged to be named earlier this year in Entrepreneur's top 50 startups to watch in the whole of the UK, which was for us our biggest moment so far in the 2.5 years we've had. And so we're looking to build on that over the next year and go the next step. It's
been an absolute pleasure having you on, Nick. Wow. Honestly, we could talk for hours, but I'm gonna ask you one more question. It's a big one.
Go on.
What are the top 3 pieces? And you've kind of alluded to some of these already, but what would you say are your top 3 pieces of advice for someone thinking about starting their own business? Okay, so number 1 is back to a previous thing I said there, is I would say go for it. Go for it. Not gung-ho, but I think we spend too much time in life generally trying to mull things over, talk things through, have meetings, plan. You're never going to get going until you get going. So you have to start. So my advice would be to anyone thinking about it, it's just to start. It's just to go. Accept that you will make mistakes. You'll make many. I'm still making mistakes absolutely every single day.
but develop a mindset that you use those mistakes to improve. Mistakes are really important. Some of the mistakes you make will end up shaping your business in the way that it needs to go. So that's the first thing, is to go for it. Second thing is going back to what I said a moment ago, is don't be afraid to ask for advice. Look around you. I'm lucky in Chester. I have a great network here. But, I'm sure wherever people might be watching this or listening, they'll be able to find those networks. And then thirdly, a bit more of a random one, get a good bookkeeper.
Okay.
It sounds random, but I was given this advice by somebody else, and it's one of the best things I've ever done. I like, because I used to spend so much time. Obviously, we've got accountants and stuff, but when we got a bookkeeper, they just completely transformed how much time I spent dealing with the admin side of my business. I'd never thought of it before, and then I've got a particularly good bookkeeper, and it frees up so much time that I was spending hours and hours and hours and hours a week. So get a good bookkeeper, and that
I love it.
Advice.
So go for it, and be aware that you're going to make mistakes along the way, but learn from those mistakes.
Yeah.
Fail fast, fail often, fail forward. Don't be afraid to ask for advice. I think it's absolute gold dust. And get a good bookkeeper.
Yeah.
And I've got a good bookkeeper as well, so I'd kind of agree with that. And she told me recently that bookkeeper is the only word in the English language that's got 3 double letters in a row.
Go on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nick. Absolute pleasure having you on. Absolute wonderful podcast. And
can I just say one thing before I go?
Of course you can.
Finally, and it's a bit of a sales thing. So the other thing I'm doing, which I'm really proud of and really passionate about, is I've launched the Chester Young Person's Business Award.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we did the first one last year, and the next one we're having this summer in July. So this is through the Chester Business Club. So when I joined the Executive Council, I was very pleased to join it. But one of my conditions on joining the council was that I said to them that I felt that as a club and as a network, we needed to do more to try and connect with younger people in Chester. And one of the ideas I had for that was to launch an awards for young people, and they held me to that quite rightly. So last year we had the first one, and what we do, it's very straightforward. We have 2 awards that we hand out. One is called the Vision Award, and all we ask for is for somebody aged up to the age of 16, so they can be 11 to 16, is to come up with an amazing idea for a business in Chester. Tell us about it. Tell us how they'd do it, what hurdles they think they'd need to overcome, and the support they'd need. And the second award is for Young Entrepreneur, which is a bit more of a traditional award. It's for somebody aged up to 30 who's been running or operating a business in Chester for at least a year. We have a ceremony in July where we hand out those awards, and the winners get some really good cash prizes to spend in the city. They get a trophy. But importantly, they get access to mentoring through the club, where they'll get one-to-one from a range of different experts, can be from legal, tech, finance, PR. So if they win, they get a month's free PR with us as well to tell the story of their business. And last year we had some amazing applicants, brilliant winners. And this year the applications are coming in, but there's still time to apply before the end of May. So if this podcast goes out before the end of May,
we'll rush it. We'll rush it through.
Yeah.
We'll get this.
If it doesn't, then please, we're hoping to have this awards for many years to come. So
is there a website for the rewards?
Yeah, so it's the Chester Business Club website, or if you find me on LinkedIn, I'll send you all the details. And it's free to enter, so there's no fee. Anyone who works in business will know you're bombarded with emails about awards, and you always have to pay for stuff.
Yeah.
It's a completely free award, no charge. If you get shortlisted, you'll get 2 free tickets to the night. Have a lovely meal at the Slow Boat restaurant in in Chester, Chinese restaurant. Our budget doesn't quite stretch.
I was going to say, I'll enter. I'm under 30, Nick.
Yeah. It's a great night, and more than anything, it's just a celebration of the fact that I think young people generally get a bit of a rough deal. I think often they're portrayed in the media as being too often lazy and a bit feckless, whereas in Chester and in most cities, in fact, there is some wonderful young entrepreneurial talent. They just need to be encouraged, and we need to celebrate what they do rather than try and stop them from actually succeeding.
Yeah, you're preaching to the converted. 100% agree. And what a way to finish.
Thank you,
Nick. Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Good luck.
Thank you.